So the thing with folklore, I think that's kind of pushed a lot of people away from it, especially in the modern Korea, because Korea tried so hard, as we know, to modernize. It's a fascinating economic accomplishment, but at the same time, there was a lot of cultural loss.
Hey guys, and welcome to a neighborhood special. Usually I would go around the neighborhood and explore the history, culture and all of that in Seoul. But today I want to shine a light on one of my regular neighborhood guides. His name is Shawn Morrissey. He appeared in Jingwangdong, Heokseokdong and the Muakdong videos. And Shawn is a folklorist, Korean heritage researcher. He writes comic books and he's the best tour guide I have ever known. Now, after his appearance, especially in Muakdong, many of my subscribers really wanted to know who Shawn is and why he knows so much about Korean folklore. So Shawn,
Yes.
welcome to the iGoBart podcast.
Yes, thank you.
Why did you come to Korea?
It's a very short, simple answer. I came to Korea because I didn't know anything about it. I've been in Korea now for 24 years. At that time, Korea still wasn't well known. It's not like today where Korea has a lot of soft power and things like that. The expression a lot of people said at the time was Korea was the ghost of Asia, and people just didn't know very much about it.
They knew China, they knew Japan.
That's right, yeah.
Not Korea.
Not Korea. It's changed a lot. It's quite different these days. The only thing I knew about Korea was there was a war here in the 50s. I knew where it was, geographically. And I think I only knew that because Canada fought in the Korean War. We learned about it in history in high school.
Well, at least you learned about it.
Yeah, 20th century history.
Which we didn't do in the Netherlands.
Oh, is that right? I decided to travel. I was quite young. I was studying in cultural studies. Yeah, I thought I want to go learn about Korea. So I will go learn about Korea in Korea. Now I'm here, I have a family, and I have a mortgage.
So what was it that was so appealing to you?
I think initially what was really appealing to me was that it was so different from what I grew up experiencing, culturally, food-wise. Yeah, so the differences really drew me to Korea. I thought it was just so fascinating to see a place that was so culturally different. But then, pretty quickly when I started traveling, I grew up very interested in folklore, and when I was a kid I loved all the folklore and things, but I didn't know it was called folklore. Then when I started traveling around Korea and learning more about it, then I realized there's actually a lot of similarities as well. Then that's what kept me here.
24 years ago,
Yeah.
Korea was a completely different country than it is today, yeah?
Yes, very, very different.
So how different was Korea back then?
I think when I arrived here, Korea was still rustic. There was a rustic feel to Korea. It was very genuine and very homely, welcoming, and comforting. Today it still is, but it's more flashy. Like especially when you go to parts of Seoul now, it's glass, these more modern-looking buildings. It really wasn't like that. Korea was still kind of getting out of the IMF. There was such an appealing draw to it because countryside, especially this is where I live, these types of areas were so attractive. I liked Seoul, but you could see that it was changing. One thing that hasn't changed is the countryside. It's still pretty much the same.
Is there a particular reason why you chose to live in the countryside?
We chose here because, well, yeah, look at it. It's beautiful, it's quiet, and there's a ton of folk traditions that are observable in areas like this, and that was one of the appeals for me as well. During COVID, it was a really nice thing to live in a place like this because close-knit community here actually supported everyone else. Nothing closed during COVID here. The entire pandemic, not a thing shut. Everything survived.
Now that's a community.
Yeah, and so it was a community feel, and it was a big part of why I love this place.
When we were in Muakdong, I was honestly also a bit surprised of how much you know about all these traditions and shrines and Sonbawi and the meaning of the mountain, the name and all of that, the Sanshin, how much you know about that.
Yeah.
Where did this initial interest come from?
The initial interest in folk tradition came from my background, my upbringing. Where I'm from in Canada is called Newfoundland, from the far east coast. We have connection to our Irish heritage, so essentially Irish diaspora. Yeah, I grew up with stories, stories of ghosts and fairies. And I mean Celtic fairies, right? The Irish fairies, not Tinkerbell and Disney. Actual mischievous, potentially dangerous fairies. And I knew people growing up who would talk about ghost stories, and not just stories, but encounters that they allegedly had. Encounters with fairies, my grandparents, my parents. This is just widespread throughout Newfoundland. So that is the catalyst for my interest in all of this, because I grew up with it, then I learned what it was as a study, and then I jumped into it.
Do you have a favorite Korean lore?
One of my favorites is right here, actually.
This is the sot.
Sotte,
Sotte?
yeah, sotte. So
I know it because of you.
yeah, right. I've read a lot about these, and I've spoken to a lot of people about these. There's a lot of different ideas about what they do, what they represent. Even in the Muakdong video, some people were commenting saying, I don't think that's right, what you said about sotte. But what I'm saying, everything that I know, like I said, comes directly from Korean people. I'm just a conduit for this information. I'm a middleman between the people who tell me things, their beliefs, their traditions, and then for me sharing it. Like a lot of people were saying, it's like, no, they don't ward off evil. Yes, there are traditions that say they do help the other totems and whatnot found near villages to keep misfortune away. And misfortune in Korean tradition is often brought about by evil spirits and ghosts. So they do represent that. So this is one of my favorite traditions. Now this is tangible, of course. The making of it is intangible, but then the product itself is something that's tangible. And this is one of my favorite types of Korean lore. Another favorite lore I have is, you can see in this tree. This is the typical Korean pine tree, the red pine tree. What I specifically love about these is that they're viewed as being powerful homes or the abodes of powerful protector gods, or they can be. And they would call them shinmok, if that's the case, god wood, god tree. As simple as a tree, but something as extremely important as a tree is also folklore to the people. They view it as being spiritually extremely important. So that type of lore, the beliefs and the commonality of day-to-day living by the people themselves, that's what fascinates me about folklore. I have a ton of favorite tales.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, but things like this, things that would be just ignored if you didn't know, if you didn't speak to anyone and find out what their beliefs were, you might just walk past it and not realize that it's actually just bursting with folk tradition.
And it's all around us.
And it's absolutely everywhere.
These days in Korea, is there any interest in folklore? Or is there interest, but people just simply don't know that they are interested in folklore?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I think that could be part of it. And like I said, that's what it was for me when I was quite young. I didn't really know that what I was interested in was folklore. I've had people contact me, and same thing, like what you're asking, say, how do you know about all this? And these are younger Koreans who are contacting me, and they're like, how do you know all this? And I tell them, it's like, your elders told me. They shared all this with me, so I sat and spoke with them. I would have tea or some soju, or a makgeolli, preferably. So the thing with folklore, I think that's kind of pushed a lot of people away from it, especially in the modern Korea, because Korea tried so hard, as we know, to modernize. It's a fascinating economic accomplishment, but at the same time, there was a lot of cultural loss. And I have met a lot of Koreans, mostly older ones, that when I ask them certain stories, say about ghosts, they will always preface the story with, I don't believe in ghosts, but this is the story that I heard. And you don't have to do that. You don't have to preface the story with, I don't believe in this, or things like that. There has been continually a kind of a pushback against folklore because there's a fear that people will think that you're backwards, you're outdated and whatnot. You don't have to believe in any of it. That's the point of it. It's tradition, it's belief, but it can exist within a sphere that isn't literal, not literal belief. Just knowing it as tradition. For example, every year on the Lunar New Year's Eve, or sometimes on Jeongol Daeburum, the first full moon of a new year, my family will hang a sieve on the outside of our door to keep the Yagwangwi away, the glowing ghost, from stealing our shoes and giving us misfortune. That's the tradition. We don't literally believe that, but following the customs is enjoyable, and you're keeping the customs alive. And my daughter, who is half Korean, she's absorbing all of this. She loves it. She knows about it. She has told her teachers and her friends in school about Korean folk tradition that even the teachers had no idea about. So, and she's 9 years old.
Shawn, he gives tours. He has the Seoul hike tour, the Ghost Walk as part of the Dark Side of Seoul, and the cemetery tour, which was added quite recently.
Yeah, over a year ago, a walk among the graves. That is a very respectful stroll through a local cemetery, a public cemetery, not private. Go through a public cemetery. I've had Koreans on the tour exploring a lot of these old folk traditions behind burial and grave sites and things like that. So this is a local shrine, and this particular tree is worshipped.
Why this particular tree? Did you find that out?
No, I've asked several people in the area why the tree itself, and they just said, "Oh, it's a spiritual tree. It has spiritual values. There's a god in the tree. Worship the god of the tree." So this is an example of a lot of the regional religion that you can find when you visit places in Korea, the countryside. Just tucked away. No one knows about it, just the locals know about it.
You write comics. You publish too.
Yeah.
self-published.
More than 2, but the Dark Side of Soul 2, yeah.
You're writing a new one?
Yeah, writing a third one, but I'm writing, I have other projects first, but there will be a third Dark Side comic, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no release date yet.
24 years later, do you still have the same love for Korea that you had when you came here the first 2 years?
I've thought about this now and again, especially recently, because I'm coming on a quarter century living here. Been here now more than half of my life. I think, yes, I love it more than I did at that time, but it's a different type of love now. My love for Korea now is based around it being home.